Good afternoon. I think we're back now. Thank you guys so much. For those of you who are not in Northern California, we had a bit of excitement over lunch with the 5.2 magnitude earthquake coming through. So hopefully everybody is safe and sound wherever you are if you're in the Northern California area. But we're ready to continue, and we're pretty stoked to bring you guys a slate of content and information for you this afternoon. So like I said, I'm just incredibly excited to be here with you guys to tell you a bit about the Outride Fund and introduce you to some amazing speakers who would tell you about different perspectives and the impact and importance of this work in changing the lives of the youth through cycling and breaking down barriers to the amazing benefits of cycling to improve social, emotional, and cognitive health that begins in our communities and something we want to do globally, but we know begins locally. So with that said, my name is Chazz Robinson. I'm the new Outride Fund Program Manager. I've been with Outride for about 2 months and incredibly excited to continue this work. But I only became a cyclist about a year ago, and in that time, my life has been transformed by riding. It's been an outlet for my improved mental health. It's helped me build a community that's gonna stay with me for the rest of my life. And so now I'm passionate about bringing this work to the rest of the world, the rest of the United States, and with communities like yours with Outride. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about that before I introduce our speakers who are going to share with you some different perspectives about the Outride Fund, and I'll introduce them in a moment, but I just wanted to tell you just a little bit more about how the program works, how the funding operates, and what you can expect for the next round. So the Outride Fund matches local fundraising efforts dollar for dollar to accelerate youth cycling projects across the country, and hopefully one day across the world. The fund provides support for trail development, youth rider development, youth education, after-school programs, workforce learning, and a whole host of projects that you can think of in your communities that breaks down barriers to access to get more kids, get more adults on bikes. So since 2019, we've invested over $1.5 million in matching grants to more than 170 youth cycling projects across the country and impacted more than 12,000 youth. I'm sure that number is even higher now. This number might be a little bit outdated. And to that point, I just wanted to share 2 success stories from our most recent round that will give you sort of illustrate the kind of work that's being done across the country, and then you'll get to hear from academic who participated in a program evaluation, and then 2 of those actual partners. So one of the projects I wanted to brag on was from an organization called Equicity, which is a racial equity movement on the west side of Chicago, operationalizing racial equity by harnessing their collective power through research, advocacy, programs, community development programs to improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in their city. The Outride Fund donated $15,000 for that organization to train students around a wave of technologies ushering in the transportation revolution across the country. These kids are going to be able to learn about how to service and work on e-bikes, scooters, etc. And that's the sort of power of students learning valuable skills to get more people on bikes. Think about that. Another such project that the Outride Fund has supported is one from Adventure for All. Adventure for All is a 501c3 nonprofit that believes that growth comes through challenges and obstacles, all while supporting athletes in their communities. The Outride Fund supported Adventure for All to teach individuals with exceptionalities to ride a bike and then also take that and participate in a 50-mile gravel race. So within a year, the program enables students to go from never riding a bike to taking on a huge gravel race. That's the power of the bike to help students everywhere, to help people everywhere outride anything. So like I said, those are just 2 examples of the incredible work that Outride Fund partners are doing. And we want to share with you guys the power to do this in your communities as well. To that end, we're really excited to share with you guys that the next round of funding for the Outride Fund application will open in January. And at that time, you can go and submit an application, a proposal for your funding, and hopefully be matched, and we can help you accelerate youth cycling in your own community. So please stay tuned for more information. more webinars about how to make that happen, or you can email me at chazz@outridebike.org for any specific inquiries. So, like I said, we have some incredible speakers here today to share with you even more in-depth perspectives about the Outride Fund. First up is a person who I can want to call my friend now, Dr. Charles Chancellor. Dr. Charles Chancellor is an associate professor at Clemson University. He created and directs the Bicycle Research Team, which conducts social science research around bicycling as a part of tourism, recreation, and youth development. And he will present some key findings from a recent report that the Clemson University team did on the Outride Fund. So I hope we have him ready to go. There he is. Over to you, Dr. Chancellor.
All right, thank you. As Chazz mentioned, I'm with Clemson University. My name is Charles, and Chazz, I appreciate the introduction, and I would be very honored if you would consider me your friend, and vice versa. So the title of this speech is Empowering Youth Cyclists, Many Routes to the Same Goal. And the reason I named it that is because as we did this research and as we've been evaluating this research, we've really seen that there's a lot of programs that are doing great stuff with kids, with youth, but they're doing it in many different ways. So that's where we come from the title. And these are select findings from a survey we did back in early spring. And there was 5 of us that are working on this, myself, another professor, and then 3 grad students. Next. So we were able to interview, and these were open-ended questions, so it's qualitative research, and we were able to interview 66 of the 123 people. In fact, the next speakers, Dan Williams actually was one of the providers, one of the respondents. I did not get to meet Dan, but my colleague Thomas Clanton did. And so this was a 54% response rate. We invited everybody, and in retrospect, we're kind of glad they didn't all show up, because I think we'd still be analyzing the data if all 123 had participated. And through this, the purpose from the Outride had charged us with was trying to better understand these organizations, the Outride Fund organizations, through the 3 key goals of Outride, which are the 3 that are mentioned here: community well-being, connecting local ecosystems, and then building public support. So our questions were based around the ideas of the mission statement, the structure, did the goals match the mission statement, the programs, the different aspects about the program, how the money was spent, how the relationship worked, working with Outride, as well as things like desired programmatic outcomes. Next. So again, this is just some key findings, things that I think are interesting that I thought the people watching this might find interesting. The organizational purpose. Now, most of these are actually come from Outride. So if for those of y'all that have funding or have applied for funding, you would have checked one of those boxes. And we noticed right off the bat, the high percentage of these that are youth development or youth focused, 62% of those. And it, excuse me, it makes sense to me that as we look at the numbers here with bicycle education, that would be really, really high, because being able to bike safely is kind of the foundation of being able to cycle to start with. But I did want to point out the infrastructure development here. This was the most common theme for organizations that were not youth focused. And a lot of these organizations were building mountain bike trails or pump tracks. That seems to really be popular right now. And several of these organizations, which I think is really interesting, were developing property either on school grounds or adjacent to school grounds, or in conjunction with a local municipal parks and recreation agency. And some of the people we talked to about this found that this was really strengthening their program to partner with these organizations. And also keep in mind, when they were partnering with schools, it was normally elementary schools, which I'll get to that idea a little bit later. Okay, next, Chazz. So here we have how many people were served annually. So there were 11 organizations that were serving less than 50. And we see the majority of the programmatic organizations were funding 100. We're serving 100 or less people, which I would imagine for those of you that do the programming, that makes sense as we had conversations with how many resources it took to do the programming. I can it became really clear really quickly why working up to 100 is quite a chore for a lot of organizations. Now we jump down and look at the ones that were serving 500 plus, and most of these organizations were the infrastructure development. So they were the organizations that were building mountain bike trails, for example, or there are Outride has also funded some very, very large organizations that do have full-time staff, which would be a key to be able to serve more than 500 people. Next, Chazz. Well, thanks. Anticipating that well. Okay, and then we talked about, sorry, I got my, there we go. Programs. Then we talked about the type of programs that were offered. Again, this makes a lot of sense that we see that safe riding skills, rider development were the two most common programs, and that makes sense because we've got youth have to be able to bike safely and efficiently to do some of the to do the programs. Now, one of the interesting things here I wanted to point out was the very bottom one, the STEM programs. And science, technology, engineering, and math programs. Now, there was only 5 of those, but they were very intriguing. And they were, I think all 5 were focused on elementary schools. So again, going back to what I said just a few minutes ago about elementary schools, a focus on elementary schools, with one of the reason is there was a lot of talk from people in this group about, Outride often focuses their Ride for Focus group on middle schoolers. NICA often focuses on middle schoolers and high schoolers. But if we start working with elementary schools, creating that habit early for cyclists, that might even be more effective to lower the attrition rate from cyclists as they go from middle school to high school, which was also a problem that people talked about. So also with these STEM programs, almost all of them were connected with a school. In one case, in 2 cases anyway, there were teachers. It was part of their curriculum. So every student at a certain age in these particular schools, they took the STEM program where they learned how to work on bikes. In one case, they built a mountain, they built a pump track out on school property. And so they really connected this into the school curriculum, and all the organizations thought that was really, really part of their strength, was the ability to do that. The other thing about having the bike as part of the curriculum in school was they felt it really normalized biking for these kids. It connected biking to not just fun, but also maybe transportation. And it also, by connecting them to STEM programs, it helped to see the bicycle in a more holistic view. Next. All right. Desired participant outcomes. So before we interviewed folks, we looked at their website. We looked at what their goals were. We looked to see if we could find their participant outcomes. In most cases, we were able to find the goals, but not the outcomes they desired for participants. But when we asked this question, we got a lot more responses than we were able to find on their websites. Again, I think some of this first one in particular, build confident and skilled cyclists, makes a lot of sense. Engage with others. Cycling can be very sociable, so that makes sense, as well as have fun. Again, makes a lot of sense. I would like to suggest that as we think about these desired goals, outcomes, these weren't as prevalently, they weren't as easy to find on the website, if they were there at all, for most organizations. But I think they should be, because the websites are to tell a story. So to put the goals is great, but then if organizations could come back and talk about, and some do, but talk more about some of the success and some of the specific outcomes that are able to be that they are able to achieve, I think that would help tell the story, tell the story a little bit better. And here's one I want to talk about real briefly: the rider empowerment to change their life and world. I think in the last few years, we've really seen empower different groups in the world and in the country become empowered. And myself and my little bike team here, we've become very interested in this idea of empowerment. And So we're actually working with Momentum Bike Clubs in Greenville, South Carolina, to implement an empowerment program to see if we can, after we are, help the students become confident, self-sufficient, healthy lifestyles, engage with others, become confident still cyclists. Can we take them to that next level of empowerment? And what the literature is talking about with that is the action steps. Take them to the action steps, whether that's the ability to excuse me, whether that's having an impact just on themselves, having an impact on their family, their friends, their community, or maybe even the world. But to take that next step to empowerment is one suggestion. I hope that as the biking community for youth, that we can continue to investigate. Diversity effort. Oh, let's see. Sorry, did I miss one? Yeah, I see. Chazz, could you go down one more? There we go. Youth-oriented organizations. As we mentioned, 82%, you can see at the top, 82% of the organizations were youth-oriented. Now, what we were doing with this table is we were analyzing these organizations based on a positive youth development model. So we're looking at trying to say, do they include a positive youth development model? And the positive youth development model has been proven to be a very good way of working with students to help them feel confident, to help give them a locus of control and things like this. So that's what we were looking for. Now, some of the characteristics of a positive youth development model include a sustained adult relationship mentoring. So we looked at that, and sure enough, 67% of the Outride Fund people do that. And some of the skills that they're building through life skills, we've got, here a variety of skills that we would expect, but we would particularly expect the first two. But then a lot of organizations talking about goal setting, and a lot of these were NICA, but some were not, talking about from week to week riding goals, for example, as well as relationship goals, problem solving, and of course communication is a huge one, extremely important in biking. The other one is meaningful youth contribution. So the positive youth development model says, if we're really going to be, as we're working with youth, if we're really going to get the best out of this relationship, they need to be engaged and they need to contribute. So rather than just receiving mentoring or just receiving information, they need to be part of the process. And so Thomas and I were really glad to see these numbers. Like here, 56% of the organizations included youth in making programmatic decisions. The peer mentoring, 20% was including peer mentoring, and most of this was older kids that had been in an organization for a while, working with younger kids, mentoring younger kids to help them find their way through this. Okay, next. Diversity efforts. One of the goals of Outride is to increase inclusive cycling, excuse me, and social equity. And so we looked at the diversity efforts of these groups. This was a very topic that groups like to talk about. And you can see that some of the target population for the groups, the most common one was actually low income as a target market. And then we can see here, girls, women, excuse me, and on down here to include English as a second language. Now, I must admit that, as you've probably caught on, none of these add up to 100 because people could respond to more of those. And in fact, almost all of the groups who work with Asian students, they would also be included in this English as a second language as well. So it was encouraging to see the wide variety here of group. Now, in some cases, they all talked about trying to be diverse, but in some cases it's kind of hard because they lived in a community or an area where there was not a lot of diversity. And those areas in particular, the idea of low income popped up as their major way of looking of trying to seek diversity. Notice here also that 32% do not target a particular demographic when they are. Where is that number? There we go. 30% says open to all, does not target a particular demographic. That is usually the infrastructure development folks. So the folks that are building mountain bike trails, for example, are trying to create even rails to trails. That's mostly their folks. They're open them to all. They're not doing programming as much as they're just providing a facility. Okay, next. Organizational measures of success. So participation rates was by far the most cited way that people determined their success. Although some organizations didn't really do that. They talked about if the kids had fun, if people are enjoying it, and there's a demand in coming back, participating again, that they would enjoy that. I would suggest that, and I know I've talked to Chazz and Esther about this, that ultimately, I think if organizations could do more evaluation of their programs to see if their programs are meeting the goals that they've set, I think that would benefit these organizations. And I also think it would benefit them in telling their story, as well as producing programs that more accurately, or as accurately as possible, reflect their goals that they want for their organization. Next, Chazz. Community impacts. This was kind of an interesting question for me with a recreation and tourism background. I always am curious about impacts, particularly when it comes down to local economic activity, which is, we can see halfway down. And I do think that it was interesting that a lot of the programs didn't necessarily see themselves as impacting the community necessarily until I asked this question. This was one where there would be a lot of pause. It's like, oh, interesting, huh? Let me think about that. And then of course, jump to ridership, because minimally, if you're teaching people to ride, you're probably increasing the ridership. But I also thought it was telling that this increased ridership wasn't just the youth in most cases that they're teaching to ride. In many cases, this led to other family members riding. It would lead to their siblings. It would lead to their parents. One wonderful story out of Arizona was it led to grandparents. And so it was becoming a demand for grandparents to join their grandkids on these rides, which I just find wonderful. And I obviously think back to if that would have happened with my grandparents, how fun that would have been, and how interesting that would have been too. Anyway, so those are some of the main ones here, but I do want to focus again on this 44% that actually help the local economy. Now, obviously, a lot of those are going to be the infrastructure ones, because the pump track and the mountain bike trails are going to attract tourists. But it's not just that. With increased ridership, some small towns, particularly in Ohio, I remember, was very clear about, we didn't even have a bike shop. We have through our programs of biking, we've grown the biking community, that now there's actually a need for a bike shop. And so, which of course helps the local economy as well. So I think some folks didn't really think about the local economy as much as they could, and how much they actually contribute. Okay, Chazz. Now my favorite question, why the bicycle? So using the bicycle to, in many cases, mentoring, using to connect with youth. Why? We have Little League, we have regular mentoring programs, we have art classes, we have all these things spread around the country. Why choose the bicycle? So my friend Thomas, my colleague Thomas, and I, we really talked about this a whole lot. And as you can see, some of the answers that we come up with: healthy exercise, sure. It's joyful, absolutely. And I would imagine that's very appealing to many of us. Encourages self-sufficiency, independence through transportation, absolutely. One of my absolute favorite reasons: it encourages adventure and exploration. It encourages freedom. I mean, how many of us can remember back when we were young youth and the bike was the main way to get out of our little area without walking, if mom and dad wouldn't take us? So in thinking about this, we could also see that a lot of other programs would provide this as well, right? Like Little League Baseball, for example. They're going to say they do healthy exercise. They're going to empower people through building confidence, teach problem solving, absolutely, double plays, this kind of stuff. Joyful, well, probably sometimes when you're winning anyway. Does it encourage self-sufficiency and independence through transportation? Probably not. Is Little League Baseball adventure and exploration? I didn't think so, but I would imagine most people don't think so. Build friendships, absolutely. So what Thomas and my team decided is that while a lot of other programs do these, the bicycle's probably does it in the most holistic way and does more of these qualities or these themes than any other activity we could find. Thomas, my colleague Thomas, is a youth development guy. That's his goal, and that's what his research is on predominantly. And he also could not come up with um, any other activity that has a recreation focus, well, any other activity period that has this many benefits. So we think that that's the main reason, is because the bike has so many benefits. And Chazz, we could move on. And this is it. This is the last one, I think. Just some select recommendations for Outride was to continue supporting grassroots organizations. As I talk to these 66 organizations, some of the bigger ones get money from a variety of resources, but wow, some of these small ones, if it wasn't for Outride Fund, they would have folded, and they would not have been able to provide near the activities and near the programs that they're able to provide. So just the outpouring of gratitude from these organizations was really phenomenal. I told Chazz and Esther, I don't think our report can clearly state how grateful folks are for the Outride Fund. Provide resources for training. A lot of these organizations were nonprofit. I think they were all nonprofit, but a lot of them had no full-time staff. So this was they asked for this type of organization. Could you give us a little bit of help on how to do this better? Encourage school-based programs like STEM, like I've already mentioned. And the schools that had the Outride Fund money connected with the Ride for Focus schools, very impressive, doing a lot of work. So I think that's a good thing to continue to think about. I've mentioned this, consider programs for elementary schools, try to start the habit of cycling earlier, and then incentivize community level collaboration. A lot of organizations collaborated, but not that much, and for many reasons. A lot of it was just time and resources, but for Outride, if it were able to incentivize community level collaboration, I think that would help with that goal of building a cycle ecosystem. And Chazz, to the very last one, and that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chancellor. We did have one quick question we want you to hang on to. We might have some more at the end of the session after the next speaker, but what are some recommendations that you have for organizations who might have limited resources to get started with sort of program evaluation and things of that nature?
I am glad you asked. Well, the first thing I would recommend is come to the workshop that's happening later today. We're going to, one of my grad students, Jasmine Vanador, is going to lead a workshop on evaluation. The other one is it's not that hard to do. There are some resources that I could provide Chazz if he would like for folks to look at. But I think, and I've told a lot of people I discussed this with, if you could partner with a local college or even a local community college, somebody in a parks recreation area, somebody in a positive youth development area, maybe even psychology, something like that. These folks do evaluation. So I know that some of the folks I interviewed with, I actually connected them with friends I had that are professors at other universities. I don't know how that's worked out for any of them yet, but I think, Chazz, I think that would be my first suggestion, would be to read up and learn about evaluation, what it is, why do it, get some more information, and then try to connect with a local university if you can.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Chancellor, and please hang on while we might have a few questions for you at the end. Next up, I'd like to introduce an Outride Fund grantee that Dr. Chancellor mentioned, participated in the study and is doing instrumental work in supporting cycling as a part of health and wellness for programs in Denver, Colorado. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Morgan Lavender and Dan Williams from Mile High 360.
Hello, thank you, Chazz, so much for the introduction. My name is Morgan Lavender. I'm the High School Health and Wellness Coordinator at Mile High 360.
I'm Dan Williams. I'm the Middle School Health and Wellness Coordinator at Mile High 360. So today we will be exploring a qualitative analysis and some anecdotal evidence of student feedback after we participated in the Steamboat Gravel Race in Colorado. While we do have some quantitative research that Outride has helped us gather that proves that biking does increase mood at Mile High 360, we wanted to explore how a select group of students from our program felt and their sense of belonging in such an incredible event.
So Mile High 360 is a Denver nonprofit that's committed to empowering young people from historically under-resourced local communities in order to give them as many choices as possible in their young adulthood. We provide youth wraparound services for first-generation post-secondary bound students. And we begin working with students when they're in 6th grade, and we support them all the way through their post-secondary pathway until they age out of our program around 24 years old. And our programming focuses on life skills through academics, health and wellness, mentoring, and we try our best to also support these students through 2-gen family engagements.
So our health and wellness department that Morgan and I are heavily involved in is centered around our cycling program. We use cycling as our anchor activities to support our students' overall well-being. We usually ride 4 days a week with anywhere from 5 to 25 students at one time. And when possible, we'll split our students into cycling groups based on their age or their ability level. And then depending on the day and the goal of the ride, we'll pick a route that is anywhere between 2 and 10 miles.
And over the summer, 7 of our strongest riders participated in the Steamboat Gravel Race here in Colorado. We did the green course, which was 37-mile race and about 2,000 feet of elevation gain.
And so our demographics for our students, 95% of them identify as Latinx, and the majority come from families with a low socioeconomic status. Our Steamboat team reflects those same demographics, with all of our student racers on that team identifying as non-white, and 6 of the 7 of them identifying as Latinx.
And as Dan and I prepared the students for the Steamboat race, we did have some concerns about how our students would or maybe would not fit into the cycling community there. As all of us know, the sport of cycling and the town of Steamboat here in Colorado is not largely diverse, and our students do not get a lot of exposure to communities outside of their own. So within our training for the Steamboat race, we not only tried to prepare our students physically, but also mentally through conversations around sense of belonging. And we wanted to talk to them about how they might feel maybe othered at the event. And as staff, part of our role is to protect, empower, and really equip our students so that they can feel as though they are meant to be there. We wanted to be extra mindful of the space that we were entering and make sure that our students felt safe and included.
So before we jump into understanding our students' sense of belonging in that race environment, we want to ask you to please enter in the chat and share how you would define a sense of belonging. So we'll give you about 30 seconds. Just please type in the chat, how do you define a sense of belonging?
And as you all are typing those things in, we also share some of the things our students said. So someone shared acceptance, beautiful. Be sure to share with everyone. Unspoken understanding, yes, Lauren. Amazing. Support is showing up. Safety, that is a huge piece, Shauna, thank you. By the close friends I have with me, awesome. So some of what you all are sharing are things that our students shared as well. So shared experiences was definitely a theme, sharing accomplishments together, challenges together, being with people that you like. Lauren wrote down laughter in all caps. Having fun has been a huge, huge piece that we'll talk a little bit about coming up here.
And before we continue, I think it's important to mention that there is no universal scale for measuring sense of belonging, but researchers generally include characteristics like feeling understood, feeling respected, connected, and happy within an experience with others.
And now we want to take some time to kind of transport you to a place. As you can tell, Dan and I work with kids a lot, so we wanted to take a time to do a little activity. So if you need to, close your eyes and think back to a time that you attended your favorite sporting event at home. So whether it was football, hockey, soccer, or underwater basket weaving event, whatever it is, notice what it felt like to be there. You were likely surrounded by similarly dressed people, maybe people wearing the same team colors as you. And everyone around you was probably rooting or booing the same times that you were, right? As a community of fans, your mood was mirroring those around you. and the sounds and the energy were probably familiar to you, right? You and everyone that you're sitting near are all partaking in the same traditions, and win or lose, you're in it together. Awesome. This is your home team. Now, draw your attention back to the chat if you don't mind. And can you take a moment to rate your sense of belonging 1 through 10? 1 being not so much, very comfortable, didn't feel like you fit in there, and 10 being a high level of sense of belonging. And please write your number in that chat. Awesome. 5s, 7s, 4s. Rate your sense of belonging. 6, 8, 8s. Perfect. Thank you for sharing.
Great. So now we want to flip that. We want you to imagine that you are the visiting team. So you've traveled away from your home to go to a sporting event. You're in a foreign place. You're in a venue that you're unfamiliar with, and you don't even know where the bathrooms are. When you get to your seat, everyone noticed you because you were wearing something different. The colors on your jersey were different. The team logo was different. Everybody noticed what was different about you because of what you were wearing. Your game time traditions differ from the home team. You might have gotten some dirty looks for booing when the home team is cheering. You clearly are standing out. You're surrounded by the home team fans. Now we want you to rate your sense of belonging again. 1 being uncomfortable and feeling like you don't belong, 10 being comfortable and this is a place where I belong. Go ahead and type that number in the chat. And we're seeing some 2s, some 4s, some 3s, a lot lower numbers.
Definitely looks like some differences. So when you are that visiting fan, you might be feeling left out, right? And questioning why you even went to the game in the first place. And maybe you did have some fun, but you probably felt like you didn't belong. And this was our concern with our students. Our Mile High 360 Steamboat team was the kind of visiting team at this race. And we held a focus group to understand their experience as that visiting team. We wanted to understand if the students felt like they belonged in that space, or if they would just feel like a visiting fan, out of place and potentially left out.
So we asked them about their sense of belonging as they defined it, and the students reported low on the scale, but surprisingly not for the reasons that we thought. We expected students to feel like outsiders to the cycling community, considering their age, their socioeconomic status, their race and ethnicity. But instead, we found that students' lack of belonging was internal to our Mile High Steamboat team. So some students were concerned about not being strong enough and feeling unprepared compared to the other students on the team. Others said that they didn't know a lot about each other and were unsure if they had similar backgrounds and experiences. Our team was first focused on what Morgan and I are calling a local sense of belonging, more than a zoomed out global sense of belonging or the cycling community at large.
And although it didn't come up in our actual focus group, Dan and I observed our students' level of confidence was strongly correlated and affected their sense of belonging also. So our team participated in a junior ride a couple of days before the race. And this mini event was for young riders to connect with each other and to test out the course. And after that junior ride, the students realized, maybe for the first time, that they could actually complete the race and that, hey, training came in handy. And our team gained a lot of confidence, seeing that they were not only ready to finish the race, but that they weren't going to be the weakest riders in the bunch. And this confidence came at first at an individual level, and then it spread throughout the team, bonding them a lot closer together. So this local sense of belonging as an individual of a Mile High 360 Steamboat team racer grew to what now Dan and I are considering more of a central sense of belonging as a junior rider who was participating in the event. So as we continue to understand the students' experiences, we learned that they did feel that global sense of belonging as a cyclist during the event also.
So now feeling confident and competent as a rider, the students experienced their surroundings during the race weekend as hospitable and kind. So when walking around the bike expo before the race, a student shared that they felt like they fit into the cycling community because everyone around them had a passion for the sport of cycling.
And while the energy was inclusive and welcoming at the race, it is of course still important to recognize that the lack of representation, the representation was not there for these students. Cycling in particular is a sport that's dominated largely by white men with high socioeconomic statuses. And research does suggest that in order to promote that positive sense of belonging, especially on the larger or global sense of belonging, it is important to have representation across all races, socioeconomic statuses, genders, and people of marginalized groups in order for them to succeed.
Overall, it was wonderful to hear how our students' sense of belonging increased when they got to know each other through challenging rides, when we were eating together, when we were playing games, and just spending hours outside of their regular Mile High programming time together. Their local sense of belonging increased over time.
And the Mile High Steamboat race team grew from more than just a group of students at Mile High 360 to students who fit in with other junior riders. And this central, love these quotes, this central sense of belonging fits as that bridge between the local and the global sense of belonging, helping them find a community outside of Mile High that they were able to connect with.
And then finally, their global sense of belonging fitting into the race space was evident. They felt a shared passion from other bike riders. And during the race, they were encouraged as people were passing them to keep moving. And the positive atmosphere of the race itself and the weekend leading up to it made students feel like they fit in, which we are all so grateful for to the Steamboat team and everybody that was involved.
And through each of these senses of belonging level, the local, central, and global, confidence, competence, connection, and fun are what really helped the students feel like they belonged. And as Dr. Walhead was sharing earlier today, that subjective norm, or how peers were interacting, did in fact prove to be such an important piece of sense of belonging, not just within our team or the junior riders at the event, but how adults there were showing excitement and passion for the sport was so, so important for our students to witness. And also, as the panel was mentioning earlier today, if our cycling community approaches the sport with a more positive attitude and that fun lens, then we'll have the ability to make that sport more accessible and just simply more attractive.
So this is all useful information that shows a positive environment can lead to a positive experience and a greater sense of belonging. So moving forward, we will still be mindful of the fact that an event like Steamboat is a heightened experience that does not always reflect reality. So to make sure our students feel like they belong in the sport of cycling, our program hopes to collaborate with like-minded programs that help reshape the sport of cycling to be more inclusive. So we were so appreciative of everyone's kindness to our students and glad to hear that they felt they belonged, and some now even identify as cyclists themselves. So although cycling is often inaccessible to certain groups, we found that when a group is inserted into a space by people who are welcoming and encouraging, it removes some of the barriers that the sport itself creates.
So next time, if you see that visiting fan at the home team game, just always remember it's so important to be kind and empathetic and welcoming, because we're all here for the passion of the game, and we're all here to include everyone as much as possible to increase that sense of belonging for everyone.
Thank you all for your time and the opportunity to share. And we will now turn it over for any questions that you have.
Wow. Thanks, Morgan and Dan, for sharing that. So inspired by your story and by other Outride Fun partners every day. We have a couple of questions for you. So for Morgan and Dan, could you tell us a little bit more about the program that you guys did to prepare students for the gravel event? What sort of things you did to prepare? What are the sorts of rides you guys did to create the community and the program that you guys did for those students?
Yeah, so to be honest, Morgan and I had never raced in something like Steamboat either. So we did a lot of outsourcing and talked to people that had more experience in the race and knew what it was like to train for things like this. So very appreciative to those people. But we mostly talked to the students, figured out what they needed, tried to get on their level to see where their head was at, and figure out where we needed to be in order to be successful at the race. And going into it, successful for us in this first time doing this race was finishing. So a lot of the training we did was focused around endurance and how long we can stay on a bike. We did do some hill riding because Steamboat is 2,000 feet of elevation gain. Students didn't love that, but was necessary. And then we also focused on things like nutrition and hydration. What happens when you hit that mental block? How can you get through it? So physically preparing by just riding when we can, and then also mentally preparing with some of those other things.
Definitely. And I'll just add one piece. We tried our best to make it as fun as possible.
Right.
Even when the students were not so psyched about those hills, we tried to always make games out of things and to just make things exciting and engaging for students.
And are there students looking forward to additional events or doing more races or in the future? What sorts of things can we look forward to from the program?
Definitely. We have every single one of the students that participated in the Steamboat race last year want to do the next more advanced course again. So they're looking forward to training again. And because the talk of the town started happening, people started sharing their experiences within the Mile High community, we now have more students who are interested in competing in a race next year.
Awesome. We have a couple more questions for Charles, if we still have them, and maybe we can kind of go back and forth a little bit. Charles, what's something that surprised you the most throughout the interview process, learning about organizations like Mile High 360 and others? What are some of the most surprising things? I know you kind of talked about them, but maybe if you had one more that you wanted to highlight.
I think the gratitude was really surprising to me. I've been around a lot of nonprofits, and I just have not seen that type of gratitude before. And I think the other thing was the wide disparity in the types of programs and the types of events that Outride funds. And I think that goes so far in building a bike ecosystem and supporting such a wide variety of people. And that was surprising to me to find out just the real breadth of the programs that these organizations did.
And then another question from the Zoom for Charles. How important is it for us to have a long-term athlete development framework in cycling, like other sports have, for us to succeed? A long-term athletic framework is the question.
Succeed in what way? I guess I'm not really sure about that. In terms of, I don't know that we need one. I think it depends on the goal of the organization. If it's a NICA team where racing is really important, I think that they may need that. But I think for most of the organizations that Outride funds, that's not what the goal is. Lifelong cyclist, I'm not sure. I mean, one of the goals is lifelong cyclist, but I'm not sure that type of detail is needed for that. So I'm not sure I completely understand that question. But another thing, though, it does remind me of another thing that surprised me was I had only talked to one other NICA program, and every single NICA program I talked to but one, their goal was not racing. Their goal was youth development, and their goal was developing community. And that was a really big surprise to Thomas and myself.
Great, thank you. Another one for Dan and Morgan. How much of a role do you think that uniformity in terms of equipment played in having that sense of belonging among the participants?
So I think within that local and that central sense of belonging, it did have a positive impact. So the students identifying as just the Mile High 360 team, and then the students identifying as a sense of belonging on the junior ride sector of it all. But more globally, I don't think it necessarily had that big of an impact. Students were looking around and they were asking why people had different types of bikes than them and everything like that. But that being said, it did make a difference. It's hard to say exactly how big of a difference or small of a difference it made.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm just patrolling to see if we have one more or a couple
If
more.
If I could add to that, if I could add to Devon's question, I did interview some of the people I interviewed said that that was one of the problems they had with increasing diversity, particularly trying to get low-end cyclists. Low-income cyclists, if they were not able to provide that same level of equipment to have that uniformity, that they found that several of their students would not participate and just did not feel comfortable. And that's within their own team. That wasn't, even going to a race like Dan and Morgan's talking about. So I think there is a role for that, at least at some level.
Great. I think we'll do just one more. For Dr. Chancellor, for people who want more numbers, were any of the organizations able to provide more quantitative findings for those community impacts, or did you guys focus more on qualitative?
So we asked about that, and only one of those 66 organizations did any kind of quantitative impacts, any kind of quantitative analysis. And they actually hired a third party organization to come in and do that for them. But most of them, it was mostly just anecdotal or participation rates.
Great. Well, Dr. Chancellor and Morgan and Dan, thank you guys so much for sharing some of the insights that you guys have learned about the Outride Fund and your program in particular in Denver. And to the audience, just again, if you guys want to create these same sorts of opportunities in your community, please look out for more information about the Outride Fund and the next application round coming early next year. And with that, we're going to transition to our next part of the day, and I have a couple of instructions for you. We've learned a great deal today already about the power of the bike, and we are finished with our sessions that we're going to have all together. But there's still a lot of exciting content waiting for you guys in the latter half of the day. So after a 15-minute break, you'll have the opportunity to interact live with other attendees and with presenters in a series of collaborative workshops led by amazing facilitators. And as this slide outlines, we'll have 2 sessions of those workshops. And within those sessions, we'll have 3 different sorts of things you can choose from to engage in. If you're not sure which one to join, please feel free to read descriptions in the Whova app and decide which one is best for you and your team. After those workshops, we'll conclude the programming for today. But we encourage you to continue to connect with other attendees and share your thoughts and share your thoughts and feelings on the community board. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for another series of amazing panels and presentations. So with that, thank you guys so much, and see you in the breakout sessions. Later.